For several weeks now, Elena Ruiz has been using her own tip money to buy breakfast for the old man in booth 6. This morning, she is already late on rent. Her mother's insulin needs refilling today, and her nephew is still waiting on school money she does not have. Then the old man walks in again, counting a few coins with shaking hands and ordering only coffee, while the smell of eggs and bacon fills the diner. Everyone else at Mabel's diner looks away. Elena does not. She sees the frayed coat, the hollow hunger in his eyes, and the expensive watch that does not belong on a man who cannot afford toast. If she helps him again, her family pays the price. She still carries the plate to his table. She has no idea everything is about to change. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The morning darkness pressed against Elena's bedroom window as her alarm buzzed at 4:30 a.m. She blinked away exhaustion, her muscles still aching from yesterday's double shift. The apartment was quiet, except for the familiar hum of her mother's oxygen machine down the hall. Elena's bare feet touched the cold floor as she padded to the kitchen. The linoleum was peeling at the corners, but she kept it scrubbed clean. Opening the fridge, she took stock of their dwindling supplies. Half a gallon of milk, some eggs, bread that was getting stale. She'd have to stretch it until payday. First things first. Elena gathered her mother's glucose meter and supplies, moving silently past Isaac's room where her nephew slept peacefully. His backpack sat ready by his desk, covered in superhero patches that hid the worn spots. "Mama?" Elena whispered, entering her mother's dim room. Rosa was already awake, sitting up against her pillows. "Mi amor." Rosa smiled tiredly. "You should sleep more. Let me check your sugar first." Elena sat on the bed's edge, taking her mother's hand with practiced gentleness. The meter beeped. 142. "Better today," Elena said, relief in her voice. The new insulin was helping, even if it cost nearly a week's tips. Rosa patted Elena's cheek. "Don't worry so much about me." "That's like telling the sun not to shine," Elena said, managing a small smile. She helped Rosa with her morning medication before heading back to the kitchen. Elena assembled Isaac's lunch with careful attention. The last apple, carefully turned to hide its bruise, a peanut butter sandwich, and crackers saved from her own meal at work. In the front pocket of his backpack, she tucked the field trip money she'd been saving all month. $20 that should have gone toward the electric bill, but Isaac's face had lit up talking about the science museum. Some things were worth the sacrifice. At the kitchen counter, Elena pulled out the stack of bills from the drawer. Final notice stamped in red across the power company envelope. Medical bills, rent due in 10 days. She tucked them away again, unable to face the numbers this early. By 5:45 a.m., Elena was walking the 6 blocks to Mabel's diner, her breath visible in the pre-dawn chill. The neon open sign flickered to life as she approached, casting pink light across the cracked parking lot. Inside, the familiar scent of coffee and griddle grease welcomed her. Mabel was already there, counting register money with reading glasses perched on her nose. "Morning?" Mabel said without looking up. "Coffee's fresh." Jerry called in sick again. Elena tied on her apron, knowing sick meant hungover. "I can cover his section." She'd been hoping to study the community college brochure during her break, but that would have to wait. The morning rush started with the usual crowd. Truckers stopping off the highway, factory workers grabbing breakfast before first shift, retired folks nursing coffee for hours. Elena moved between tables with practiced efficiency, remembering every order without writing them down. "More coffee, Mr. Patterson." She was already pouring before he nodded. "You're an angel, Elena," he said, his weathered hands wrapped around the mug. She noticed a young father at table 6 checking prices anxiously while his son stared at plates passing by. The boy couldn't have been more than 7, his coat sleeves too short at the wrists. When the father ordered only coffee, Elena accidentally brought toast with it. Later, she slipped the boy an apple from her own lunch, winking as she set it down. His gap-toothed smile was worth missing lunch herself. Between refills and orders, Elena's mind wandered to her old dream. A warm, welcoming cafe with mismatched mugs and affordable meals. A place where young people could learn job skills, where elderly neighbors could gather, where no one had to count coins under the table. The dream felt impossibly distant now, buried under years of more urgent needs. She was wiping down the counter when Mrs. Sullivan's coffee cup crashed to the floor. Before the elderly woman could apologize, Elena was already there with a replacement cup and a gentle, "No worries at all. These things happen." The morning wore on. Elena's feet ached in her worn sneakers as she carried plates, cleared tables, and smoothed over small crises. A mixed-up order here, a spilled drink there. She handled each with the same steady kindness, even when her own worries pressed at the edges of her mind. The breakfast rush was finally thinning when movement caught her eye. Through the streaked front window, she saw an unfamiliar figure approaching, an elderly man in a faded brown coat that had seen better days. He entered slowly, the bell above the door announcing his arrival. His shoes were polished but worn, his posture proud despite his obvious fatigue. Elena watched as he chose the smallest booth by the window, the one that caught the morning sun. He settled in carefully, his movements deliberate, like someone trying not to draw attention to their own discomfort. She reached for her notepad, straightened her apron, and prepared to greet another person who might need more than just a meal. The elderly man studied the laminated menu with careful attention, his weathered fingers tracing down the columns of prices. Elena gave him a few extra minutes, filling sugar dispensers nearby while watching from the corner of her eye. When she approached his table, his posture straightened slightly, as if gathering dignity. "Good morning," Elena said warmly. "Can I get you started with some coffee?" "Just coffee, please," he replied, his voice unexpectedly refined despite his worn appearance. Black. As Elena poured the steaming coffee, she noticed how his hands stayed beneath the table edge. The soft clink of metal against metal gave away what he was doing, counting coins, probably wondering if he had enough for anything more substantial than coffee. The morning sun slanted through the window, highlighting the frayed edges of his coat collar. Though the garment was clean and carefully maintained, it bore the subtle signs of daily wear. His face held a quiet dignity that made Elena's heart ache. This wasn't someone looking for handouts. This was someone trying to preserve his pride. She touched the tip money in her apron pocket. $12.35 so far. Rosa's diabetes medication would cost $68 even with insurance, and they were already 3 days late refilling it. Every penny today needed to go toward that prescription. The man lifted his coffee cup with slightly trembling hands. When the door swung open from the kitchen, bringing the smell of bacon and pancakes, Elena saw him inhale deeply, his eyes closing for just a moment. A nearby table received their breakfast platters, and she caught him glancing at the steam rising from their eggs. Elena's fingers wrapped around the money in her pocket. Rosa needed that medication. Isaac needed new shoes. The electric bill was overdue. All the practical reasons to walk away crowded her mind. But she couldn't do it. She couldn't let him sit here hungry when she had the power to help, even if it meant going without lunch herself. Again, she returned to the kitchen where Mike was working the grill. "Mike, I need a standard breakfast platter. Scrambled eggs, wheat toast, and a bowl of oatmeal with raisins." "Ticket?" he asked, spatula poised. "Kitchen mistake," Elena said smoothly. "I'll handle it." A few minutes later, she approached the man's table with the loaded plate and bowl. "I'm so sorry to bother you, sir, but we had a mix-up in the kitchen." This order was made by mistake, and it'll just go to waste otherwise. Would you mind helping us out by taking it?" He looked up sharply, his blue eyes keen and assessing. "I only ordered coffee." "I know," Elena said, already setting down the plate. "But food waste is such a shame, isn't it? And the oatmeal's fresh. Mabel's special recipe with brown sugar and raisins." His hands remained still on the table. "Young lady, Please," Elena said softly. "It would really be doing us a favor." Something passed between them in that moment. An understanding, perhaps, or a shared acknowledgement of the gentle fiction she was creating to protect his dignity. After a long pause, he nodded once. "Very kind of you," he murmured. Elena smiled and turned away quickly, giving him privacy with his breakfast. Through the rest of her shift, she made sure his coffee stayed full, but otherwise let him eat in peace. She noticed he cleaned every plate methodically, using the toast to wipe up the last traces of egg yolk. When he finished, she slipped his check face down on the table, charging him only for the coffee. She watched him lay out coins carefully, counting them twice before standing to leave. He met her eyes briefly on his way out, inclining his head in a slight bow that spoke volumes. After he left, Elena took $7 from her tips and rang up the breakfast platter properly, adjusting the inventory. Her stomach growled as she cleared the table, reminding her that lunch break was approaching. But she couldn't spare any more money today, not with Rosa's medication waiting. The rest of her shift passed in a blur of coffee refills and sandwich orders. By evening, her feet aching and her stomach empty, Elena finally walked the 6 blocks home. She found Rosa in her usual chair, watching Isaac do homework at the kitchen table. "Did you eat dinner, mi hija?" Rosa asked, studying Elena's tired face with maternal concern. "Oh, yes," Elena lied smoothly, managing a smile. "We had some extra club sandwiches at the end of my shift." She kissed her mother's cheek, then Isaac's head, before retreating to her room. In private, Elena emptied her apron pockets and counted the day's earnings twice. $43 in tips, minus the $7 she'd spent on the old man's breakfast. $36, just over half what they needed for Rosa's medication. She pressed her hands against her eyes, fighting back tears of frustration. Tomorrow, she would try again. Tomorrow, she would do better. But she couldn't make herself regret feeding the old man. Some kinds of hunger went deeper than food, and some forms of dignity were worth more than money. The next morning, Elena's alarm pierced the darkness at 4:30 a.m. Her stomach cramped as she rolled out of bed, a reminder of yesterday's missed meals. In the kitchen, she stretched the last of the cereal between 2 bowls, giving Isaac the bigger portion and keeping just a handful for herself. Rosa was already awake, sitting at the small table with her glucose monitor. "Mi hija, don't forget my prescription," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Of course, Mama. I'll pick it up after work today." Elena kissed her mother's forehead, hoping her smile looked more confident than she felt. The truth was, she still needed another $25 for the medication. "Are you sure you're eating enough?" Rosa's eyes were sharp with concern. "Don't worry about me. The diner always has plenty of food." Another small lie to protect someone she loved. Elena grabbed her coat and hurried out, before Rosa could ask more questions. The pre-dawn air bit through her thin jacket as she walked the familiar blocks to Mabel's diner. Christmas lights still hung in a few windows, though January was nearly over. The town always seemed to hold on to holiday decorations a little too long, as if afraid to let go of any spark of cheer. Inside the diner, Elena tied on her apron and started the morning routine. Brewing coffee, wiping down tables, filling sugar dispensers. Her movements were automatic after so many years, letting her mind wander to the bills waiting at home. Maybe she could pick up an extra shift on Saturday if Mabel needed help. The breakfast rush started right on schedule, truckers wanting eggs and hash browns, factory workers grabbing coffee before their shifts, a few regular retirees sharing toast and gossip. Elena moved between tables with practiced efficiency, remembering how each customer liked their eggs, who needed extra napkins, whose coffee cup should never run empty. At precisely 7:45, just like yesterday, Walter appeared at the door. He wore the same carefully brushed coat, his silver hair neatly combed despite the wind outside. He chose the same booth by the window, his movements deliberate and dignified. Elena approached with fresh coffee. "Good morning, sir. Coffee to start?" "Yes, thank you." His voice carried that same unexpected refinement. He studied the menu with careful attention, though Elena suspected he had memorized every price yesterday. "Just the coffee?" she asked gently when he set the menu aside. "Yes, that will be fine." His hands disappeared beneath the table again, and Elena heard the familiar sound of coins being counted. She hesitated only a moment before heading to the kitchen. Yesterday hadn't been a one-time crisis for this man. This was his routine, his careful rationing of whatever small income he had. The thought made her chest ache. "Mike," she called to the cook, "I need another kitchen mistake breakfast." Mike raised an eyebrow, but didn't comment. He'd worked with Elena long enough to trust her judgment. This time, she added a small bowl of fruit beside the oatmeal. Walter looked up sharply when she set down the plates, his blue eyes keen and questioning. "Another mix-up?" he asked quietly. "We can't serve fruit after it's been plated," Elena explained smoothly. "Health code rules. Such a waste otherwise." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "What's your name?" he asked, his tone gentle. "Elena." "Elena?" He repeated it carefully. "How long have you worked here, Elena?" "Almost 8 years now." She adjusted a spoon unnecessarily, buying time to stay at the table. "And do you enjoy it? Serving people?" The question caught her off guard. Most customers never asked about her at all. "I like helping people," she answered honestly. "Some places need keeping alive, you know?" Walter's gaze sharpened with interest. "Yes," he said slowly, "they do." Before Elena could respond, Mabel's voice cut through the morning clatter. "Staff meeting, everyone. Now." In the kitchen, Mabel's face was drawn with worry. "Listen up," she said, her usual gruffness hiding concern. "Food costs are up again. We're running too close to the edge on inventory. One more bad month and—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Elena's heart sank. The diner was more than just her job. It was a second home, a gathering place, a last anchor for people who needed somewhere to belong. Even as she worried about her own bills, she couldn't bear the thought of it closing. The rest of her shift passed in a blur of coffee refills and quiet calculations. She made $3 less in tips than yesterday. The medicine would have to wait another day. As she wiped down tables for closing, Elena watched through the window as Walter walked away into the gathering dusk. His shoulders were straight, his pace measured. But something in his solitary figure made her wonder where he went at night, where he slept, what circumstances had brought him here. She locked up the diner with heavy thoughts and heavier feet, knowing tomorrow would bring the same impossible choices between helping others and providing for her own family. The next morning arrived too soon. Elena's eyes felt gritty from another night of tossing and turning, her mind spinning with numbers that refused to add up. Rosa's medicine, Isaac's field trip money, and now the diner's uncertain future weighed on her as she unlocked the front door at 5 a.m. The empty diner was peaceful in the pre-dawn darkness. Elena moved through her opening tasks mechanically, starting coffee, checking supplies, wiping down already clean counters. The sound of the heat clicking on barely covered the whisper of rain against the windows. At exactly 7:45, Walter appeared. His coat was damp from the drizzle, but his posture remained perfectly straight as he settled into his usual booth. Elena brought coffee without being asked. "Good morning," she said. warming yesterday's half-full cup. Nasty weather out there. Indeed. Walter's eyes crinkled slightly. Though the coffee makes up for it. Elena hesitated, then added, Kitchen-made extra oatmeal today, with brown sugar. It had become their careful dance, her offerings wrapped in little fictions, his graceful acceptance that preserved his dignity. When she returned with the steaming bowl, she noticed his hands were especially unsteady. The next morning was clearer, but colder. Walter arrived precisely on schedule, and Elena had his coffee ready. This time, she brought him scrambled eggs with toast, claiming another table's order had been mixed up. They exchanged quiet words about the forecast, the morning paper, the way sunrise painted the old brick buildings across the street. Friday brought a small rush of workers heading to early shifts. Elena juggled multiple tables but still managed to slip Walter a warm breakfast sandwich. He thanked her with a slight nod, then surprised her by asking, "The young boy who comes in after school, is he yours?" Elena glanced toward Isaac's usual booth, now empty. "My nephew," she said softly. "I'm raising him." Walter didn't press, but his expression held understanding rather than pity. Elena found herself adding, "After my sister passed, 3 years ago now. He seems like a thoughtful child. I've noticed him doing homework." "He is." Elena's voice carried pride through the sadness. "He works so hard. Never complains." The following Tuesday, Walter spent longer than usual studying the dining room while Elena refilled coffee cups. His gaze traced the water stain spreading across one ceiling tile, lingered on the duct tape holding a vinyl booth together, noted the way Mabel massaged her knee as she worked the register. "This place has history," he observed when Elena brought his usual breakfast. 52 years, she confirmed. Mabel's mother opened it, back when the mills were still running. And now? Now we take care of who's left. Elena straightened a sugar packet holder. Not everyone can afford the fancy places by the highway. Walter nodded slowly. Places endure because someone keeps choosing them. The words settled in Elena's chest like a warm stone. They felt personal, as if he'd seen past her cheerful efficiency to the daily choice of showing up, staying steady, keeping faith in something larger than herself. Through the rest of the week, their morning exchanges continued. Walter asked small but careful questions about the town, the regulars, the rhythm of diner life. Elena found herself sharing more than she intended, about Isaac's art projects, Rosa's garden before she got sick, her own abandoned dreams of culinary school. Walter listened with genuine interest, offering neither judgment nor false encouragement. Sometimes he simply nodded, as if confirming something to himself. Elena noticed he watched everything, how she handled difficult customers, calmed kitchen tensions, remembered regulars' dietary restrictions without being reminded. The following Monday morning brought heavy fog and few customers. Walter nursed his coffee longer than usual, while Elena reorganized the pie case. When she passed his table later, she found it empty, except for a folded $20 bill beneath his cup. A note beside it read simply, "For the pie case, not for me." Elena picked up the money with trembling fingers. The gesture struck her heart. Not just the unexpected help, but the way he'd framed it. He was protecting her pride as carefully as she'd guarded his. She tucked the 20 into the register, imagining fresh pies in the case. Warm pieces served to people who needed sweetness in their day. She glanced out the foggy window, but Walter had already disappeared into the gray morning. Only his empty coffee cup remained, still warm to the touch. The next morning dawned crisp and bright, sunlight glinting off frost-covered cars in the diner's parking lot. Elena tied her apron with practiced motions, her mind drifting to the $20 bill Walter had left yesterday. The gesture had kept her awake last night, wondering if he somehow knew about her small deceptions with his meals. She glanced at the clock. 7:40 a.m. 5 minutes until Walter's usual arrival time. Elena started his coffee brewing and pulled out a clean mug, arranging cream packets just so. The morning regulars filtered in: Tom from the hardware store, Sarah who drove the school bus, the construction crew that always wanted extra syrup with their pancakes. 7:45 came and went. Elena's eyes kept darting to Walter's empty booth while she poured coffee and took orders. By 8:15, worry gnawed at her stomach. She'd never seen him miss a morning, not once in these past weeks. "Order up," Mabel called from the kitchen window, making Elena jump. She delivered plates of eggs and hash browns, refilled coffee cups, but her thoughts stayed with Walter's absence. During a quiet moment, she wrapped a warm biscuit and banana in paper napkins, tucking them into her apron pocket. Maybe on her break, she could walk the nearby streets, check the park benches where she sometimes saw elderly folks resting. The breakfast rush was in full swing when the first black SUV pulled into the lot. Elena barely noticed it through the window, focused on juggling plates of French toast and bacon. But then another identical vehicle appeared. And another. They kept coming, sleek and dark, until 10 massive SUVs had arranged themselves in a precise line across the parking lot. The diner fell silent. Forks paused midway to mouths. Every head turned to watch as men and women in expensive suits emerged from the vehicles. Some wore earpieces and stood scanning the area with practiced attention. Others carried leather briefcases and tablets. "Sweet Jesus," Mabel whispered from behind the register. "Are they shutting us down?" Elena's hands trembled as she set down her coffee pot. Through the windows, she could see the group approaching the entrance with purposeful strides. The bell above the door chimed as they filed in, filling the small diner with the scent of leather and costly cologne. A woman in a charcoal pantsuit stepped forward. Her silver hair was perfectly styled, and her red-soled heels probably cost more than Elena made in a month. Behind her stood a man whose suit screamed "attorney" from his wire-rimmed glasses to his monogrammed briefcase. "We're looking for Elena Ruiz," the woman announced, her voice carrying authority that silenced even the sizzling grill. Elena's throat went dry. She stepped forward, conscious of syrup spots on her apron and a loose strand of hair that had escaped her ponytail. "I'm Elena Ruiz." The attorney moved to stand beside the woman. "Ms. Ruiz, we're here regarding Walter Hale." Elena's heart clenched. "Is he okay?" "Mr. Hale suffered a medical emergency early this morning," the attorney said, his tone carefully measured. "Before being transported to the hospital, he left explicit instructions to locate, and, I quote, the waitress from Mabel's diner, who fed me when she had no reason to." Elena heard Mabel's sharp intake of breath behind her. The attorney continued, "What you may not know is that Walter Hale is the founder and majority shareholder of Hale Industries. The manufacturing complex on the north side? That's just one small part of his enterprise." The room spun slightly. Elena gripped the edge of a nearby table. The Walter she knew, her quiet morning regular who counted coins under the table, was a corporate titan. "Mr. Hale has been living privately since stepping back from public life 5 years ago," the silver-haired woman explained. "He's been evaluating certain things, including this establishment and its staff." The attorney cleared his throat. "He was quite clear that you've been covering his meals from your own earnings, Ms. Ruiz, without recognition or expectation of repayment." Heat flooded Elena's cheeks. All those careful deceptions, the extra breakfasts, the mistaken orders, hadn't fooled Walter at all. He'd known exactly what she was doing. "Mr. Hale has requested your presence at the hospital," the woman said, "if you're willing to come with us." Elena looked back at Mabel, who stood frozen behind the register, then at her regular customers, whose faces showed the same shock she felt. The biscuit and banana still weighed in her apron pocket, a simple kindness now revealed as something much more complicated. I need to tell my mother where I'm going, she managed. We've already sent a car to explain the situation to Mrs. Ruiz, the attorney said smoothly, and to ensure your nephew gets safely to and from school today. They'd thought of everything. Elena untied her apron with shaking fingers and handed it to Mabel, who finally found her voice. Go on, Mabel said gruffly, but her eyes were soft with concern. We'll manage here. The silver-haired woman gestured toward the door, and Elena followed her out into the morning sunshine. The SUV's leather seats were cool and pristine. As they pulled away, Elena watched through the tinted window as her familiar world, the worn diner, the worried faces, her ordinary life, receded into the distance. The elevator doors opened onto the 12th floor of Madison Memorial Hospital, and Elena stepped into another world. Gone were the bustling corridors and crowded waiting rooms of the public floors below. Here, thick carpeting muffled footsteps and original artwork hung on walls painted in soothing earth tones. Security personnel stood at strategic points, their earpieces gleaming. Men and women in expensive suits huddled near a nurse's station, speaking in hushed tones while clutching tablets and phones. They all turned to stare as Elena followed the silver-haired woman down the hallway, her work shoes squeaking slightly on the polished floor. Wait here, the woman instructed, gesturing to a set of leather chairs. Elena sat, acutely aware of her waitress uniform and the lingering smell of coffee and bacon that clung to her clothes. Through nearby windows, she could see the entire town spread out below, including the tiny dot that was Mabel's diner. So you're the waitress. The voice was cool and precise. Elena looked up to find a younger woman studying her with barely concealed skepticism. She was perhaps 35, wearing a cream-colored blazer that probably cost more than Elena's monthly rent. Her pearl earrings matched her manicure perfectly. I'm Elena Ruiz, Elena offered, standing and extending her hand. The woman ignored it. Vivian Hale. Walter is my grandfather. Her tone suggested this fact alone gave her the right to pass judgment. Tell me, Ms. Ruiz, did you know who he was when you started your little charity project? Heat crept up Elena's neck. No. He was just a customer who looked hungry. How convenient. Vivian's perfectly shaped eyebrows arched. And you didn't think to notify anyone? The manager? Social services? You just took it upon yourself to feed him for free? He wasn't asking for help, Elena said quietly. He was trying to keep his dignity. His dignity! Vivian's laugh was sharp. While you pocketed his change and marked his meals as mistakes? We've seen the receipts, Miss Ruiz. Very creative accounting. Before Elena could respond, the silver-haired woman returned. He's awake. The doctor says we can see him briefly. Vivian straightened her blazer. I'll go first, of course. Family should... He's asking for Ms. Ruiz, the woman cut in. Specifically. Elena followed them down another hallway to a private room. Medical equipment beeped softly, and morning sunlight streamed through wide windows. Walter lay propped up slightly on pristine white pillows, looking smaller than she remembered but still alert. His eyes found her immediately. Everyone out, he said, his voice hoarse but firm. Except Elena. Vivian started to protest, but Walter raised one hand weakly. Please, Vivian, give us a moment. The room cleared reluctantly. Elena stood awkwardly until Walter gestured to a chair beside his bed. I'm sorry, he said once she'd settled, for the deception. You knew? Elena's voice cracked slightly. The whole time? Walter's smile was tired but warm. That you were paying from your tips? Yes. I saw you count the same bills twice some mornings. Noticed how the meals never appeared on the register screen? Embarrassment washed over Elena. All her careful schemes had been transparent. Why didn't you say something? Because I needed to know. He reached for a cup of water, and Elena automatically helped him steady it. I needed to know if you would keep helping when there was no advantage in it, when the person you were helping appeared to be nobody important. You were testing me? The hurt in her voice surprised her. Walter sighed. I've spent years surrounded by people performing kindness for cameras, for tax write-offs, for social capital. My own family. He glanced at the door. They've forgotten the difference between charity that feeds the giver's ego and true service that protects someone's dignity. He studied her face. You did the opposite of what most people do. You hid your generosity. You made sure I never felt like a burden, even when it cost you. Elena looked down at her hands. Nobody should feel ashamed of being hungry. Tell me something true, Walter said softly. Something you've never told anyone who could make it happen. What would you do if resources weren't an issue? The question caught her off guard, but something in Walter's steady gaze made her answer honestly. I always wanted. There's this empty storefront on Mason Street. I used to imagine turning it into a cafe. Not fancy, just good food, fair prices. We could train local kids, give people second chances, maybe have a pay-it-forward board where folks could buy meals for others who need them. She stopped, embarrassed by how much she'd revealed. But Walter was nodding slowly, his expression thoughtful. The door opened, and a nurse announced visiting time was over. As Elena stood to leave, Walter caught her hand. Thank you, he whispered, for making me human again. The silver-haired woman, Elena now knew she was Walter's attorney, accompanied her back to the waiting SUV. As they descended through evening traffic, the attorney cleared her throat. Mr. Hale would like to meet with you again tomorrow, she said. He says there are things to discuss that are larger than gratitude. Elena's feet ached as she climbed the hospital steps the next afternoon. The morning shift had been particularly demanding, with customers peppering her with questions about Walter and the mysterious SUVs. She'd deflected as best she could, focusing instead on coffee refills and breakfast orders. Rosa had gripped her hand before she left home. Mihija, be careful, she'd warned, dark eyes worried. Rich people's problems can swallow poor people whole. Isaac had hugged her tightly, whispering, But what if it's something good, Tia Elena? The same security team escorted her to Walter's room, but today the atmosphere felt different. Walter sat more upright, his color better, though medical equipment still beeped steadily around him. A small table had been pulled close to his bed, covered with folders and documents. Elena? He smiled, gesturing to the chair beside him. Thank you for coming back. How are you feeling? She asked, settling into the chair. Strong enough for an important conversation. He tapped the folders. I've been thinking about Mabel's diner. Elena's stomach tightened. Mr. Hale, if this is about the free meals… Walter, please, he corrected gently. And no, this is about something much larger. He opened one of the folders. The building housing Mabel's diner is owned by a development company that's been raising rent steadily while ignoring repairs. The property has multiple liens against it. Mabel is drowning in debt trying to keep it afloat. Elena's chest constricted. She'd suspected things were bad, but hearing it confirmed made her dizzy. How do you know all this? I had my team look into it yesterday. Walter's eyes were kind but intense. I want to purchase the building through my foundation, clear the debts, renovate it completely. And then, he paused, watching her carefully. I want to install you as managing partner under a community trust we'll establish. Elena stared at him. I don't understand. It gets bigger, Walter continued. The diner would become the centerpiece of a local initiative. Job training programs for young people, affordable meals for families struggling to make ends meet, scholarships for teenagers like Isaac. He pulled out more papers. We'd create a sustainable model that could be replicated in other communities. Mr. Hale, Walter. Elena's voice shook slightly. I'm just a waitress. I don't know anything about running a business or managing programs. Don't you? Walter's voice grew firm. I watched you for weeks. You handle difficult customers with grace. You remember everyone's preferences and stories. You notice who needs extra care before they ask. You protect people's dignity while solving their problems. That's leadership, Elena. But the woman who covered my meals without making me feel like a charity case? Who carries other people's burdens while hiding her own? Who keeps choosing kindness even when it costs her? Walter leaned forward. That's exactly who should be leading this initiative. Before Elena could respond, the door opened. Vivian entered with two older men in expensive suits. Board members, Elena guessed from their authoritative manner. Grandfather, Vivian's voice was carefully controlled. Are you sure you should be discussing business so soon after your health crisis? I'm quite sure, Walter replied firmly. Elena, these are Jonathan Pierce and Richard Townsend from our board of directors. The men nodded coolly. Ms. Ruiz, Pierce said, we understand you've developed quite an interesting relationship with Mr. Hale. Through serving him free food without authorization, Townsend added. Actually, Walter cut in, through showing exactly the kind of character we claim to value in our community outreach mission. Elena sat straighter. I never asked for anything from Mr. Hale. I only wanted to help someone who was hungry. How convenient that your help was directed toward someone of considerable means, Vivian observed. I didn't know who he was, Elena said quietly, and I help anyone who needs it. Ask anyone at the diner. That evening, Elena visited Mabel at home, needing to understand the diner's true situation. The older woman's hands trembled as she pulled out stacks of bills and bank notices. I've been robbing Peter to pay Paul for 3 years now, Mabel admitted. One more bad winter might finish us. I just couldn't bear to tell everyone. Her eyes filled with tears. That place was my mama's whole life. Now it might die on my watch. Back home, Elena found Isaac at the kitchen table, colored pencils scattered around him. He was drawing with intense concentration, a bright new sign for the diner, complete with twinkling lights and fresh paint. The word "Welcome" arched over the door in careful letters. Elena stood behind him, one hand on his shoulder, staring at the hopeful scene he'd created. Her heart raced with equal measures of possibility and fear. The future suddenly felt vast and uncertain, full of both promise and peril. The next morning, Elena's fingers brushed against Isaac's folded sketch in her purse as she walked to work. The paper had become like a talisman, carrying both hope and weight. The drawing showed the diner as Isaac imagined it could be, bright, welcoming, full of life. But this morning, even the familiar walk felt different. She noticed a neighbor watching from behind curtains, and the usual nod from Mr. Peterson at the hardware store lasted a bit longer than normal. Inside Mabel's diner, the morning light revealed every crack and stain she'd grown used to ignoring. The vinyl booths showed their age, the ceiling's watermarks seemed darker, and the ancient coffee maker sputtered more than usual. Still, the breakfast regulars filled their usual spots. Truck drivers claimed their stools, and the smell of bacon and coffee wrapped around her like a familiar blanket. Did you see the paper? Jenny, the morning cook, thrust the local gazette at Elena. A small article mentioned Walter Hale's hospitalization and included a blurry photo of the SUVs outside the diner. The word redevelopment appeared twice. Don't let it distract you, Mabel called from the register. Tables need clearing. But distraction proved impossible when 3 men in suits arrived mid-morning. They introduced themselves as Walter's property assessment team, pulling out tablets and measuring tools. They photographed the kitchen equipment, tested faucets, and examined the electrical panel while customers watched with undisguised interest. "Look at this wiring," one man muttered. "Complete overhaul needed." "Foundations solid, though," another noted. "Good bones." During their lunch break, Mabel pulled Elena into the storage room. The older woman's face had softened from its usual stern expression. "I've been thinking," Mabel said, fidgeting with her apron strings. "Maybe change wouldn't be the worst thing." She gestured at the shelves of dwindling supplies. "I've been fighting so hard just to keep the lights on. I forgot what Mama always said about this place. It's not about the building. It's about the welcome inside it." Elena touched Mabel's arm. "I would never want to change that part." "I know." Mabel's voice grew thick. "That's why, well, if someone had to take this place forward, I'm glad it might be you. You understand what matters here." By afternoon, Mayor Thompson himself stopped in for coffee, talking loudly about community development grants and historic district funding. The local bank manager followed shortly after, mentioning small business loans with surprising enthusiasm. Elena kept serving, refilling, clearing, but she felt the weight of every eye, heard the whispers behind every menu. That evening, Rosa listened quietly as Elena described the day's events over their simple dinner of beans and rice. Isaac had already gone to bed, his sketch now hanging proudly on the refrigerator. "Mama, it feels impossible," Elena admitted. "Like a dream I'm afraid to trust." Rosa stirred her tea slowly. "Mi amor, I want everything good for you. But remember, when powerful people suddenly offer gifts, there are always strings attached. Be careful which ones you let them tie to you." "Walter seems different," Elena protested. "He understands what the diner means to people." "Perhaps," Rosa nodded, "but he is not the only one with power in his world. And not everyone sees kindness the way he does." As if proving Rosa's point, Elena's phone buzzed with a social media alert. Someone had posted a photo of her getting into one of the SUVs, with the caption, "Local waitress hits the jackpot?" The comments below ranged from supportive to suspicious. The next morning brought more suits, contractors this time, measuring windows and discussing renovation permits. A bank representative arrived with preliminary partnership proposals. Walter's attorney delivered a thick envelope containing documents that named Elena as Executive Director of Community Programs for something called the Hale House Initiative. For the first time in years, Elena felt her chest expand with real hope. She imagined Isaac attending college, Rosa getting proper medical care, young people training in a renewed kitchen. The weight of constant worry began to lift, just slightly. But as she went to lock up that evening, movement caught her eye through the window. Vivian Hale stood in the back alley, her expensive phone raised to photograph the kitchen entrance. When she noticed Elena watching, she didn't even pretend to be embarrassed. Instead, she deliberately turned to snap pictures of the overflowing dumpster and the stack of supplier invoices visible through the office window. Their eyes met through the glass. Vivian's gaze was cold and calculating, the look of someone searching for weakness. She lowered her phone slowly, nodded once, and walked away into the gathering dark. The hospital's rehabilitation wing had been transformed overnight. Security guards lined the hallways, and a small podium faced rows of chairs where local reporters sat clutching notepads and cameras. Elena smoothed her borrowed blazer, the nicest thing she owned, and tried to steady her breathing. "Stand here, please." Walter's assistant guided her to a spot beside his wheelchair. Walter looked frail under the lights, but his eyes held their usual sharp intelligence. "Ready?" he asked softly. Elena managed a nod, though her heart hammered. The room filled with clicking cameras and murmured conversations. She recognized faces from the diner. Tom from the Gazette, Sarah from Channel 6, even that blogger who always ordered extra napkins with his coffee. Walter cleared his throat and began speaking, his voice carrying surprising strength. "For those who remember, Mabel's Diner was once the heart of this town. When factories ran 3 shifts, it never closed. When families struggled, somehow there was always an extra plate. That spirit of community hasn't died. It just needs renewed resources to thrive again. He detailed the renovation plans, describing updated kitchens, expanded seating, and preserved historic features. But it was more than just a building project. The Hale Community Initiative would provide job training, affordable meals, and educational support. Elena felt tears prick her eyes as Walter announced a scholarship fund for local students. And leading this effort, Walter continued, will be someone who already demonstrates the values this program represents. Elena Ruiz understands that true service isn't about profit. It's about dignity, opportunity, and hope. The questions began immediately. Elena managed to answer without revealing too much about their private interactions, focusing instead on possibilities for the future. "We want to create a place where everyone belongs," she said, surprising herself with her steady voice. "Where young people can learn skills, where families can afford good meals, where nobody has to pretend they're not hungry." After the formal announcement, the day became a whirlwind. Old-timers brought faded photographs of the diner from decades past, celebrations, first dates, late-night gatherings after high school football games. Mr. Davidson from First Regional Bank approached with talk of flexible financing options. "We've been waiting for something like this," he said. "The whole downtown could turn around." Elena's phone buzzed constantly. Isaac's principal called about potential scholarship opportunities. The vocational school director wanted to discuss training partnerships. Even the mayor stopped by, mentioning grant programs and tax incentives. In a quiet moment, Mabel pulled Elena aside, her usual gruffness softened by emotion. "Been running that place 30 years, she said, wiping her eyes. "Thought I'd have to watch it die. Now maybe I can step back, knowing it's in good hands." She pressed a ring of old keys into Elena's palm. "These go to everything. Back office, supply room, safe. Better start learning them all." For several shining hours, Elena let herself believe in this new reality. She sat with Walter's project team, contributing ideas about menu planning and staff development. They discussed community outreach programs, apprenticeships for at-risk youth, and ways to preserve the diner's heritage while building something new. But there were shadows at the edges of this bright moment. During the presentation, Walter had stumbled over words mid-sentence, and medical staff had immediately surrounded him, adjusting monitors and oxygen levels. Elena noticed how quickly they moved him back to his room afterward, despite his protests that he felt fine. Vivian maintained a professional demeanor throughout the announcement, even offering congratulations with a perfectly practiced smile. But her eyes remained cold, evaluating every move Elena made. During the planning session, Vivian took copious notes while saying very little. The silence felt deliberate, calculating. Most concerning was the change in Walter's longtime attorney, Mr. Patterson. Once openly supportive, he now seemed distracted and tense. When Elena asked about next steps, his answers became vague. He checked his phone constantly, stepping out for whispered conversations. Something was shifting in the background, but Elena couldn't grasp what. The day's excitement carried her through her bus ride home, her mind full of possibilities. Isaac would be thrilled about the scholarship news. Maybe Rosa could finally see that specialist she needed. The diner's future stretched before her, bright with promise. But when Elena reached her apartment door, reality crashed back harshly. A paper had been shoved underneath, face down on the worn carpet. She picked it up, then felt her stomach clench. It was a grainy photo, clearly taken through the hospital room window, showing her standing beside Walter's bed. Across the image, someone had scrawled a single word in thick red marker: "Gold digger." The morning air bit cold and sharp, as Elena hurried toward Mabel's diner. Her mind still stuck on the cruel message slipped under her door. The sight that greeted her stopped her mid-stride. Mabel stood on the sidewalk, arms crossed tight, face drawn with worry, as two men in city uniforms examined clipboards and shook their heads. "Complete shutdown, effective immediately," one inspector declared, affixing a bright orange notice to the front door. "Multiple critical violations." "But these are the same conditions you've passed for years," Mabel protested, her voice cracking. "Nothing's changed since last month's inspection." Elena approached cautiously. "What's happening?" The second inspector turned, his expression hardening as he recognized her. "Health code violations, improper food storage, inadequate refrigeration maintenance, expired permits." He flipped through pages. "And apparently some concerning reports about unauthorized food distribution." Mabel's face fell. "What reports?" Elena's phone buzzed. A local news notification appeared. "Scandal at historic diner. Waitress accused of food theft and fraud." Her hands trembled as she opened the article to find her own photo staring back, alongside details of unclaimed breakfast orders and manipulated tickets spanning weeks. "Is it true?" Mabel demanded, her eyes searching Elena's face. "Were you giving away food without recording it?" Elena started, but the truth caught in her throat. How could she explain that mercy had seemed more important than money? That feeding a hungry man had felt right, even knowing it broke rules? The inspectors methodically documented violations in the kitchen. The temperamental freezer that sometimes ran warm. The crack in the floor tile they'd covered with a mat. The ceiling leak they'd managed with buckets during rain. All the small imperfections they'd worked around for years suddenly became ammunition. Elena's phone kept buzzing. Text messages poured in, some supportive, others accusatory. A former regular customer walked past, averting her eyes. Another stopped to stare openly, whispering to her companion. By mid-morning, the final blow landed. Walter's attorney called, his voice strained. "I'm sorry, Elena. There's been an emergency injunction filed against the trust. Ms. Hale and several board members are challenging Mr. Hale's mental competency. All projects are frozen pending review. And they've requested you have no further contact with Mr. Hale." "But he's all alone there," Elena protested. "He needs—" "I understand, but my hands are tied. Security has been notified. Please don't try to visit." The diner's regular breakfast crowd gathered on the sidewalk, reading the closure notice and trading theories. Elena heard fragments of conversation. "Always seemed too good to be true. Poor Mabel. Trusted the wrong person. Probably planned it from the start." A few loyal customers defended her. "Mrs." Martinez hugged her fiercely, whispering, "We know your heart, dear." But others who'd smiled at her just yesterday now turned away. Mabel sat heavily in a patio chair, looking older than Elena had ever seen her. "I understand why you did it," she said quietly. "Feeding people who need help, that's what we've always done here. But not recording it, hiding it. You put everything at risk. All our jobs, our licenses." She pressed her lips together. "I can't keep you on staff after this. I'm sorry." Elena nodded numbly, unable to speak. She gathered her few belongings from her locker. Spare apron, family photos, Isaac's drawings pinned inside the door. The walk home felt endless. Rosa was waiting, worried. "What happened?" "Mrs. Cooper upstairs said there were inspectors." "I lost my job," Elena managed. "And the trust. Everything's frozen. I can't—" She looked at the medicine bottles on the counter, nearly empty. "I can't refill your prescription yet." "We'll manage," Rosa said firmly, but Elena saw the fear in her eyes. That evening, Elena sat at their small kitchen table paying bills, stretching what remained of her last paycheck. Isaac's voice drifted through the thin walls from the hallway, where he'd gone to return a borrowed game to their neighbor's son. "Your aunt's the one who stole from the diner?" another child asked loudly. "My mom says she tried to trick that rich old man, too." "She didn't," Isaac protested. "She helps people." "Yeah, helps herself to their money," a different voice sneered. Elena heard Isaac's running footsteps, then the slam of their apartment door. He ran straight to his room without speaking. Later, after Rosa and Isaac were asleep, Elena sat alone in the darkness. The city lights filtered weakly through their window, casting shadows on the stack of unpaid bills. The same compassion that had felt so natural, sharing food with a hungry stranger, had somehow led here, jobless, shamed, unable to care for her family. The crumpled photo from under her door lay on the table, its red accusation stark even in the dim light. She touched it gently, wondering how an act of kindness could destroy so much. The morning sunlight offered no warmth through the apartment windows. Elena stood in their small kitchen, mechanically opening and closing cabinets, counting what remained. Half a box of pasta, 3 cans of soup, some stale bread. The refrigerator held little more than condiments and a carton with maybe 2 eggs left. Rosa's pill organizer sat on the counter, compartments nearly empty. The sight of it made Elena's stomach clench. Without insurance, the refill would cost more than their remaining savings. She could hear Isaac in his room, rustling through his backpack, probably double-checking his homework like he always did when trying to maintain normalcy. "You should eat something," Rosa said from the doorway, leaning on her cane. Her face showed the strain of watching her daughter's life unravel. "I'm not hungry," Elena replied automatically, though her empty stomach argued otherwise. "You can't help anyone if you collapse." Rosa's gentle rebuke carried the weight of long experience. "What are you going to do?" Before Elena could answer, her phone buzzed. An unknown number. She almost ignored it, but responsibility won out. "Hello? Ms. Ruiz? This is James Morton from Halston and Reed, representing the Hale family interests." The voice was professionally smooth. "We'd like to meet with you this morning to discuss a resolution." An hour later, Elena sat in a downtown office, staring at papers laid precisely before her. The lawyer explained in careful terms, a modest settlement, enough to cover immediate expenses, and tied them over until she found new work. All she had to do was sign a statement acknowledging poor judgment in her handling of diner resources, agree to step away from any public role in community projects, and commit to never discussing Walter Hale or their interactions. "It's a generous offer," Mr. Morton said, "considering the circumstances. The family wants to avoid further complications." Elena read the carefully worded admission of guilt again. It wasn't entirely false. She had broken rules, however good her intentions. The amount offered would cover Rosa's medication, the overdue electric bill, and Isaac's school expenses. When she got home, Rosa could see the conflict in her face. "Majita," she said softly, "sometimes pride must bow to necessity. Isaac needs stability. Your mother needs medicine. There is no shame in choosing survival." Elena unfolded the papers again, staring at the signature line. The pen felt heavy in her hand. Through the window, she could see snow clouds gathering, matching her dark mood. "I need to think," she said, pulling on her coat. "I'll be back soon." The walk downtown was bitter cold. Elena found herself on the street where Mabel's diner stood dark and silent, its windows reflecting gray sky like tired eyes. Several regular customers stood on the sidewalk, peering inside as if attending a wake. Mr. Johnson, who'd come for coffee every morning for 30 years. Mrs. Peters, who brought her grandchildren for pancakes on Sundays. They nodded to Elena, their faces showing more sorrow than judgment. Through the glass, she could see Mabel at a booth, surrounded by stacks of papers. Elena hesitated, then knocked softly. After a moment, Mabel came to unlock the door. "Thought I might find you here," Mabel said, her voice gruff but not unkind. "Come in before you freeze." Inside, the diner felt wrong. Too quiet, too still. Mabel returned to her paperwork, sorting receipts into piles. Elena stood awkwardly until Mabel sighed and gestured to the opposite seat. "I'm still mad," Mabel said bluntly. "But I've been doing these books all morning, and you know what I found? We've been running at a loss for months before any of this happened. I kept cutting corners, stretching supplies, ignoring problems because I couldn't bear to see this place die." She met Elena's eyes. "And I let you carry the weight of feeding people who needed help, pretending not to notice because it kept my conscience clean. That shame's on me." Before Elena could respond, Mabel's radio crackled with a weather alert. The storm was intensifying. Power outages likely. The church shelter downtown was asking for emergency volunteers, worried about their elderly residents if heating failed. Elena's phone buzzed again. The lawyer, asking about the settlement papers. She touched the folder in her coat pocket, feeling the weight of the choice it represented. Security versus truth. Safety versus service. Outside, the first heavy snowflakes began to fall, thick and fast. Within minutes, the street disappeared under white. Elena's phone lit up with a text from the church coordinator. "Power flickering here. Any chance you know how to organize emergency meals?" The snow fell in thick curtains as Elena hurried from her apartment, carrying 2 canvas bags stuffed with whatever food she could gather. Her neighbors had quickly emptied their own pantries when she knocked. Canned vegetables, dried pasta, half-empty boxes of crackers. Mrs. Rodriguez from 3B had even insisted on giving her a large pot of homemade soup she'd just finished cooking. The church shelter's windows were dark when she arrived, the power already out. Inside, elderly residents huddled under blankets, while volunteers passed out flashlights. The coordinator, Sarah, rushed to meet her. "Thank God you're here," Sarah said, her breath visible in the cold air. "We've got at least 50 people who need hot food, and more keeping coming in from the apartments down the street." Elena surveyed the situation with the same steady focus she'd used during countless busy shifts. "The kitchen here runs on electric stoves? Everything's down. We can't even brew coffee." Elena pulled out her phone. "Give me 20 minutes." She called Mike at the auto shop first. He had a large propane grill he used for summer cookouts. "Bring it," she said, "and any fuel you've got." Next, she contacted the hardware store owner who lived above his shop. "We need extension cords, work lights, anything battery-powered you can spare." The covered lot beside Mabel's diner was perfect, protected from snow, close to the shelter, with good ventilation for the grill. Within an hour, a makeshift kitchen materialized. Volunteers strung battery-powered lights between posts. The grill threw off welcome heat as Mike got it running. Someone brought folding tables from the church basement. Elena moved through the space with quiet authority, directing people without raising her voice. "We'll heat the soup in batches. Set up the bread station here. Keep the hot chocolate separate for the kids." Her diner training showed in every efficient decision. The crowd grew as word spread. A police officer brought coffee urns from the station. The grocery store manager arrived with day-old bread and pastries. 3 teenagers Elena recognized from the diner appeared with their parents' camping stoves, perfect for heating more soup. She was stirring a fresh pot when she heard the familiar jingle of keys. Mabel stood at the diner's side door, her face unreadable in the strange light. "Freezer's still good," Mabel said gruffly. "Be a shame to let it all go bad." She disappeared inside and returned pushing a cart loaded with supplies, frozen vegetables, meat that could be grilled, containers of prepared sides that hadn't sold before the closure. They worked together without discussing it, falling into the rhythm of countless shared shifts. Mabel handled the grill while Elena organized serving stations. When an elderly man apologized for needing seconds, Elena gave him the same dignified smile she'd once given Walter. "There's plenty," she said, filling his bowl. "Please eat." The night deepened. Snow continued falling. Utility trucks crawled past with their yellow lights flashing. Elena made sure every worker got hot food and coffee. She noticed faces in the crowd that had turned away from her at the diner days earlier, now watching thoughtfully as she worked. Mr. Peterson, who'd made a show of refusing to sit in her section after the scandal broke, accepted soup with mumbled thanks. Mrs. Wheeler, who'd shared the cruel social media posts, quietly joined the volunteer line. Even the local reporter who'd written about the stealing allegations helped distribute blankets without touching his phone once. "You don't have to do this," Mabel said during a quiet moment, her voice softer than usual. "Not after everything." Elena wiped steam from her face. "Yes, I do." Near midnight, the crisis rhythm finally slowed. The shelter had power again. Most residents were warm and fed. Elena was boxing up leftover bread when she noticed a young woman in a drenched wool coat hovering nearby. Despite her disheveled appearance, something about her crisp manner suggested Walter's legal team. "Ms. Ruiz?" The woman glanced around nervously. "Could I speak with you privately? It's important." Elena nodded, too tired to be suspicious. They stepped into the shadow of the diner's awning, where the young woman reached into her bag and withdrew a sealed envelope. The handwriting on the front was shaky but familiar. Inside the darkened diner kitchen, the battery-powered lantern cast long shadows across familiar equipment, now silent and cold. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she held Walter's envelope. Mabel stood beside her, arms crossed, while their unexpected visitor shifted nervously from foot to foot. "I'm Nora Bell," the young woman said, water still dripping from her coat onto the floor. "I'm a paralegal at Morton & Associates. We handle much of Mr. Hale's personal legal work." She glanced toward the windows as if checking whether anyone could see them. "What's happening to you? It isn't right." Elena studied the envelope, running her thumb across Walter's unsteady handwriting. "Won't you get in trouble for bringing this?" "Probably," Nora admitted. "But I can't watch them twist everything he wanted into something ugly. Mr. Hale trusted me to make sure you got this if things went wrong." With careful movements, Elena broke the seal and unfolded several pages covered in Walter's distinctive script. The lantern light made reading difficult, so Mabel held it closer as Elena began. "My dear Elena," the letter began, "if you're reading this, it means others have tried to separate us and challenge my judgment. First, you should know that I was fully aware each time you paid for my meals from your own pocket. I watched you count tips twice, adjust tickets, and skip your own lunch. Your kindness was never hidden from me, only from others." Elena's voice caught. Mabel squeezed her shoulder, urging her to continue. "But there is a deeper truth you must understand," Elena read. "In 1962, I was a 12-year-old boy whose father had just died. My mother worked 3 jobs, but we could barely afford rent. Every morning she would bring me to this same diner before school. She only ordered coffee, just as I did with you." Mabel inhaled sharply. "Mother never told me." "The owner then was Grace Jensen, your mother, Mabel. She noticed my mother's pride, her exhaustion, her determination to keep me in school despite our poverty. Grace began adding eggs and toast to my mother's coffee, claiming kitchen mistakes or extra portions that needed using. She protected our dignity while making sure I didn't study on an empty stomach." Tears rolled down Mabel's cheeks. "That sounds exactly like Mama." Elena's hands shook harder as she turned the page. That simple mercy made everything else possible. "My mother found better work. I earned a scholarship. The business empire everyone now fights over began because one woman in a small diner decided kindness mattered more than money. When I returned this year, I needed to know if that spirit still lived in these walls. Elena, you proved it does. You fed a stranger with the same grace Grace Jensen once showed me, asking nothing in return. Nora stepped forward. The rest of the letter contains dates, amounts, and witnesses. Everything needed to fight the competency challenge. Mr. Hale documented your interactions meticulously because he feared exactly what's happening now. Why didn't he tell me any of this? Elena asked softly. He wanted to see your true character, Nora explained. If you'd known who he was, your kindness might have seemed calculated. He needed to know you'd help anyone, not just someone important. Elena read further, her voice growing stronger. I'm not just offering you a job or a building, Elena. I'm entrusting you with a legacy of quiet mercy that saved my family when we had nothing. My granddaughter Vivian never understood why this old diner mattered so much to me. Perhaps she never will. But you understand, because you live it every day. Mabel wiped her eyes. All these years, I thought Mama was just soft-hearted, letting people eat without paying. I never knew. The letter ends with legal instructions, Nora said, and a reminder that they'll offer you a settlement to go away quietly. Mr. Hale says you must choose freely, but he hopes you'll fight instead. Through the kitchen windows, they could see the storm beginning to ease. The emergency meal station outside was nearly packed up, volunteers heading home through the thinning snow. Dawn wasn't far off. Elena carefully folded the letter and slipped it back into its envelope. The settlement papers in her coat pocket suddenly felt heavy, like a weight she could finally set down. She looked at Mabel, then at Nora, her decision crystallizing in the lantern's dim light. I won't sign their papers, she said quietly. I won't pretend what happened here was wrong. The county courthouse loomed ahead, its stone steps already crowded with reporters and curious onlookers. Elena's worn black dress felt too thin for the January chill as she climbed those steps with her small group. Rosa gripped her arm for support, while Isaac stayed close to Mabel's protective bulk. Nora Bell hurried ahead to guide them through security and into the hearing room. Inside, the wood-paneled chamber buzzed with whispers. Elena recognized faces from the diner mixed with business people in expensive suits. Camera phones tracked their progress to the front tables. Isaac's hand found hers and squeezed tight. It's okay, Aunt Elena, he whispered. You always say the truth is stronger than being scared. Vivian Hale sat with her attorneys at the opposite table, elegant in charcoal gray. She didn't look directly at Elena, but her spine stiffened when they passed. The judge, an older woman with steel-rimmed glasses, studied papers while they settled into place. All rise, the bailiff called out, and the proceedings began. Vivian's lead attorney launched their attack immediately. He projected diner receipts onto a screen, highlighting irregular timestamps and missing entries. Ms. Ruiz consistently failed to record meals properly, creating a pattern of deception that raises serious questions about her intentions toward Mr. Hale. Security photos appeared next. Elena entering Walter's hospital room, Elena speaking with him in the diner, Elena accepting documents from his lawyers. An opportunistic relationship cultivated over weeks, the attorney declared, taking advantage of our client's isolation and declining health. Elena felt the room's judgment pressing against her skin. She thought of the settlement papers she'd torn up that morning, how easy it would have been to sign them and disappear. Rosa patted her hand, reminding her to breathe. The attacks continued. Policy violations, character implications, suggestions that she had manipulated a lonely old man's gratitude into a massive financial opportunity. They even brought up her overdue bills and her sister's death, painting her as desperate enough to exploit anyone's kindness. When Elena's turn came to speak, she rose slowly. The microphone hummed as she adjusted it. She looked not at the lawyers or the cameras, but at the faces she knew from years of early mornings. Truck drivers, teachers, retired couples who counted quarters for coffee. "Yes, I broke diner policy," she began quietly. "I marked meals as paid when they weren't. I used my tips to cover food I gave away. If that's wrong, I accept the consequences." Murmurs rippled through the room. Elena continued, her voice steady. "But I won't apologize for feeding someone who was hungry. I didn't ask Mr. Hale's bank balance or last name. I saw his hands shake when he counted coins under the table. I noticed him breathing in the smell of breakfast he couldn't afford. Where I come from, you don't need paperwork to share food." She glanced at Mabel, who nodded slightly. "The diner has always been more than a business. It's where truckers get warm after night runs, where kids do homework if home is too chaotic, where elderly neighbors sit all afternoon because loneliness hurts worse than empty pockets." Elena squared her shoulders. "I gave Mr. Hale breakfast the same way I've helped others. Not for reward, not for attention, simply because hungry people should eat." Nora stood then, approaching the judge with Walter's letter and a thick folder of supporting documents. "Your Honor, we submit Mr. Hale's personal testimony and contemporaneous notes documenting his interactions with Ms. Ruiz. He recorded dates, amounts, and his own clear intentions regarding both the meals and his later decisions." As the judge reviewed the materials, a commotion arose in the hallway. The doors opened to reveal medical personnel with a transport chair. Walter Hale, thin but alert, was being wheeled carefully into the chamber. "I apologize for the dramatic entrance, Your Honor," Walter said, his voice frail but clear. "But some truths require personal witness." Vivian half rose, her composure cracking. "Grandfather, you shouldn't be here. Your doctors—" "My doctors are with me, and I am quite competent to speak," Walter interrupted. He fixed tired eyes on the judge. "I chose Elena Ruiz not from confusion or manipulation, but because she proved something essential. Integrity doesn't change based on who's watching." The room hung silent as Walter detailed the board's attempts to block his charitable initiatives, his private investigation of the diner, and Elena's consistent kindness, even when she thought he was just another struggling customer. He named board members who had tried to isolate him, exposed attempts to bury community project proposals, and clearly outlined his reasons for trusting Elena with his legacy. When he finished, the judge removed her glasses and studied the room carefully. Her ruling was clear. Walter Hale was fully competent. His wishes regarding the trust would stand, and all holds were to be released immediately. Elena released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Beside her, Isaac grinned, and Rosa whispered a prayer of thanks. Across the aisle, Vivian Hale lowered her eyes to the table, her shoulders sagging as if a great weight had finally become too heavy to carry. Spring sunlight crept across the newly refinished floors of Mabel's table. Elena stood in the doorway, just as she had hundreds of mornings before, but everything else had transformed. The cracked linoleum was now warm hardwood. Fresh paint brightened the walls. Through spotless windows, the morning cast long shadows across booths that no longer sagged or squeaked. Elena's routine remained unchanged in some ways. She still arrived before dawn, still checked the coffee makers and prep stations, but now she moved through a space that matched the dignity she'd always tried to give it. The kitchen gleamed with new equipment, and the training area buzzed as two single mothers learned the breakfast shift under Chef Mike's patient instruction. She paused at the wall near the register, touching the elegant plaque that read, "Meals Given in Quiet." Below it hung 4 framed photographs. Mabel's mother from the 1950s, her kind eyes and flour-dusted apron capturing a generation of service. Walter's mother, holding him as a small boy outside the original diner. Walter himself during his weeks as their anonymous regular. And Elena, caught unaware while sliding a free breakfast to a teenager who'd been sleeping in his car. "Getting sentimental this morning?" Mabel called from the counter, her voice gruff with affection. She sat like royalty on her cushioned stool, reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed the previous day's numbers. She'd insisted on keeping the books even after Elena offered her full retirement. "Just grateful," Elena replied, straightening the fresh flowers on the counter. The diner's finances were stable now. Rosa's insulin arrived regularly, and Isaac's private school uniform hung pressed in his closet. But Elena made sure they never forgot the lean times that had shaped them. The bell chimed as Vivian Hale entered, wearing casual clothes instead of her usual business suit. She'd been coming in twice a week, slowly thawing, though this was her first early morning visit. Her heels clicked against the hardwood as she approached the counter. "Is it too early to discuss the scholarship program?" Vivian asked, her formal tone not quite hiding her uncertainty. "We have 20 applications from local students, and I thought, well, I'd value your input on the selection criteria." Elena gestured to a booth. "Join me for coffee?" "The kitchen's making Walter's oatmeal recipe this morning." A flash of emotion crossed Vivian's face at her grandfather's name. She nodded, sliding into the booth while Elena brought 2 steaming mugs and a plate of fresh scones. They spread the applications between them, and Elena noticed how Vivian had flagged stories similar to her own. Students raising siblings, working multiple jobs, choosing between textbooks and groceries. "You understand their circumstances better than I do," Vivian admitted quietly. "I want to help, but I don't want to." "Presume. We'll figure it out together," Elena assured her. The partnership was new and still awkward, but it felt right, like healing spreading outward. Through the windows, Elena saw Isaac arriving with his backpack. He liked doing homework in the corner booth before school, proud to be part of the place that had changed their lives. The training kitchen staff called cheerful greetings as he settled in with his books. The morning light strengthened, painting everything gold, when Elena noticed a man hesitating outside. His clothes were clean but worn, his expression a familiar mix of hunger and shame. He entered slowly, chose the smallest booth, and studied the menu far too long, just as Walter once had. When Elena approached, she saw his hands beneath the table, counting coins. His eyes stayed fixed on the coffee prices, shoulders tense with the math of dignity versus need. "Coffee, please," he said quietly. "Just coffee." Elena nodded, keeping her face neutral and warm. "The kitchen made extra breakfast skillets this morning during training. Would you mind helping us out by taking one? Otherwise, it goes to waste, and Chef Mike gets grumpy about food waste." The man's throat worked. "I don't want to be any trouble." "No trouble at all," Elena assured him, already turning toward the kitchen. She returned with a full breakfast: eggs, potatoes, fresh fruit, and toast. She set it down with the same casual grace that had once preserved Walter's pride, then walked away before the man could protest. From the counter, she watched him slowly begin to eat, his shoulders gradually relaxing. Mabel caught her eye and smiled, a lifetime of understanding passing between them. The wall of photographs seemed to glow in the morning light, each face a link in a chain of quiet mercy. The diner hummed with life around her. Isaac bent over his books, Vivian making notes about scholarships, new staff learning to carry plates with confidence, regulars greeting each other like family. Elena felt the fullness of it in her chest. The miracle wasn't just that someone had noticed her kindness. It was that now she could do so much more of it, turning one moment of grace into a legacy of hope. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please like the video and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.